Welcome to Roar Healing Stories. I'm your host, Ellen Line. Let's dive in. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Roar Healing Stories. I'm here today with Anna. Anna, tell us
Hi.
about your work or
Yes.
who you are. It doesn't have to be about work.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm
Yeah.
excited to be here.
Yeah.
My name is Ana Vidina Hernández. I am an artist and business owner out of Austin, Texas.
Mm.
I focus my art on anything and everything I choose to explore, but currently, musicals, writing musicals, writing books. I'm writing a YA
Mm.
sci-fi novel, working on a album of my music, painting. Again, love to explore lots of different things.
Yeah.
And then my business is Vidina Visions Consulting, and I imagine we'll talk more about it. But I combine my background in social work and creativity to support individuals and organizations in bringing their ideas to life.
Oh, I love that. I love all of that. Thank you so much for being here and for being willing to share about both your work and also your healing journey. And I think like right before we started recording, I was saying that I feel like a big part of healing stories is this idea that healing can look any kind of way.
Mm.
And so I'm really excited to hear. So, for context, listeners at home, Anna and I really got to know each other because she was offering a group that was sort of exploring and reading through The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, which Anna has read many times. And I imagine we'll talk about that too. Uh, and that group was like just so it was like it unlocked a phase of healing. Like, I didn't even know that I necessarily had some of those wounds around creativity that
Mm.
I had, and that we, like, got to work on and work through and, like, just be with in, The Artist's Way and in the group that we've had since. So I'm really excited to hear from you about sort of, being on both like your healing journey, but then also
Mhm.
kind of how it has looked for you to be with others and like accompanying others in their healing journeys. Um, I'm just so
Yeah.
excited. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
I was thinking, as you were saying that earlier, that my healing journey and what I do now and my creativity are
Mhm.
inextricably linked. Like, I could not do what I do now with the freedom I do it without the
Yeah.
healing work I've done. So I do think that
Yeah.
they're, in my case, very integrated. And that probably is true for a lot of people in different ways.
Yeah. Do you feel comfy kind of started like elaborating there? Like, tell us a little bit
Yeah.
more about your healing
Yeah.
journey and how that's like freed up your creativity.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was
Mhm.
thinking about what that has looked like and the trajectory of my
Mhm.
life. And I was thinking that two themes that have been really clear for me in my healing journey have
Mhm.
been a theme of integrating and
Mm.
a theme of shedding shame. And I think
Mm.
both of those have allowed me to show up as my whole self in my business and my creativity. And I thought I would share some examples of what that looked like for me growing up to now. And I won't dive into like my whole entire trauma history for the listeners, but I do think that there's like some themes that are probably relevant and related. And in general, I feel like one of the best ways to shed shame is to like talk about things, right? Because I think shame
Yeah.
kind of thrives in secrecy. And that was a big part of my story.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about the idea of integrating as like, if you knew me growing up, if you could have seen what was happening on the outside and what was
Mm.
happening on the inside of my life, you would have seen very different things.
Mm.
So, for example, I played music my whole life. I played music with my family. That's why I played music. My parents had a band. I was literally, my mom was pregnant with me when they were recording their last album of their band.
Mm.
Like, I was gestated in a recording studio. So, I think a lot of that was inevitable that I would have,
Mm.
in some way, shape, or form, loved music and made music and played music.
Yeah.
I think when you have an enmeshed family dynamic, it's really complicated to learn music, but also be stopped from being able to have your own differentiated voice. And
Mm.
that was kind of my experience. And so, yes, I like performed on stage for the first time when I was 6, but also when I tried to make like a band for myself in high school, well, by the time you saw me in college, it was a family band again,
Mm.
because that's kind of how that mesh dynamic played out.
Mm.
So on the outside, you would have seen like, oh my gosh, look at this family that plays music together. Oh my gosh, look at this little kid who can like do harmonies and all these kinds of things and play multiple instruments. And on the inside, you would have seen a lot of like controlling, a lot of not allowing differentiating, um, and a lot of like, you know, wanting to have your vision or your like unfulfilled creative dreams lived through your children. And I think
Mm.
that's one of the reasons that healing is so important for adults, is because there's so many unlived dreams. And she talks about that a lot in The Artist Way. So when your
Mhm.
parents are blocked artists, I think it can be really hard for them to allow you to be your own artist self and
Mm.
celebrate your creativity and your unique voice and your crazy ideas and all the things, right, that you would want.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think like that's one example of some of the work I did in The Artist Way, was like going back and saying, wow, I never was allowed to be like my own artist self, like
Mm.
express my individuality, take my ideas and make them into reality, which is, of course, what I do with my business now.
Yeah.
Um, and so it was important to me to be able to get in touch with my inner artist child, which is what, Julia Cameron kind of talks about as your artist, as your inner artist child.
Mm.
And I have done parts work as part of my therapy healing journey. And so that
Mm.
really spoke to me. And so it's kind of going back and being like, hey, like, little artist, what do you like? What do you want? What delights you?
Mm.
And that was a really cool experience I had over the past. So I did the Artist Way for the first time in 2022. So I'm about to hit 3 years since I did it for the first time. And
Mhm.
it's a 12-week um, self-paced course. So I've done it 5 times
Mhm.
total in 3 years, which is wild. Last time I
Mm.
did it was with Ellen in our Artist Way group. Um, and so really getting to know my own unique voice has been a really amazing process of differentiating and of identifying those things that interest me, so that I can not feel like I constantly have one of my parents looking over my shoulders, like
Mm.
judging what I'm doing. And I can look inward toward myself of like, where does my art?
Mm. Oh, I love that. I'm curious if there are specific moments or maybe memories that you can point to or that sort of come to mind as you're thinking about talking about integration, like,
Yeah.
or have there been specific like projects that kind of
Mm,
felt like they came out of that growth?
yeah. Yeah. I think, so I started writing musicals when I was in high school. I had
Yeah.
2 ideas for musicals starting when I was 15. And I worked on some songs for him and things like that. And then I didn't work on them for about 10 years.
Mm.
And a big part of that was, and I'll kind of talk through other pieces of my story of like what additional things that were around like shame and things like that,
Mhm.
because it all kind of flows together. But I think with that, is a good example where when I did the Artist Way, she has you go look at your old wounds,
Mhm.
and you need to spend time grieving them, and then also um, see what basically relationship you can have to that creative project now.
Mhm.
And so I went with my friend who I first did the Artist Way with. We went to a writing retreat,
Mhm.
and it was really beautiful how they set it up, because the first hour was improv. And I
Mm.
had done some improv in high school, but I hadn't done it in a long time. So we did this whole hour of improv. And I remember this very particular exercise because my biggest mental block was writing dialogue. I was like, but how does one how do people talk? Like I know I'm a human, but I don't know how people talk. But it was just this really funny mental block. So there's this exercise where we would thread our fingers together and our thumbs were up, and then we'd make our thumbs talk to each other. And whoever sort of threw you the ball basically was like, here's the setting. So they gave me like a spaceship. Um, and I had my little characters talk to each other. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, dialogue is just people talking. And so then we had lunch and then we had the whole afternoon on this big property. And it was a
Mm.
nice windy day and it was lovely. And so I just like sat out there with my iPad and finally wrote the freaking draft of the musical that I had wanted to write since I was 15. So it's like 15 years later. Um, and I was like recording voice memos of songs and, I was really flowing. And I even like the wind, as I mentioned, was moving through. So, like, a character who's an artist in the musical, like, talks about how he gets his songs from the wind and his mom has passed. And so there's this, like, all of these themes of grief. And that's
Mm.
an example, I think, of integration where I like took something that I had as an idea that was very charged in the sense of like I hadn't followed it through, right?
Mm.
So it was a little bit painful to revisit, but
Mm.
also that I brought myself now to the project. And so what I identified that I didn't have back then consciously is that there's so many themes of grief in this musical, which makes a lot of sense from like my childhood. But now with the social work training and the work that I've done, and I've done like a lot of work around grief for myself and in my social work, it's more integrated into the musical
Mm.
and it's named and it's an important theme. And there's a grief like melody, like there's a theme of grief that plays, various times throughout different songs.
Mm.
And so it was a way to like bring this project into the now.
Mhm.
So my 15-year-old self is like excited because it gets to have a life, right? And now it's been like submitted places and I've like sung it at an open mic night at a musical festival I went to, like one of the songs from it. So it gets all of these different lives. But then my current self has like put in the updates of like,
Mm.
okay, now we know this as grief. Like now we
Mm.
can name this as grief. Now
Yeah.
that can be something we're expressing through music and through
Yeah.
characters and through relationships and between the characters. And
Yeah.
so it gets to have this new life that is all of me in there.
Mm.
And I can protect it in the sense of like I can take in feedback. As Julia Cameron says, when it's feedback that's, you should take in, it's an aha moment, which
Yeah.
is very different from like a blocked person giving you really mean feedback, which you should protect your inner artist child from.
Yeah.
And so it's been on this journey that's been so healing because I have been able to then do that and like protect the project and protect my inner artist child from
Mhm.
something like that, right?
Yeah.
And not take that in, but
Yeah.
also find the people who I trust to give me valid, supportive, loving feedback.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself is such a huge shift for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine how different that feels, like, you kinda described, like, sort of that feeling of, like, your parents sort of over your shoulder,
Yeah.
and it just feels like that how you were able to, like, write this musical so, so different from, starting the band when you were 15 and how much more of yourself you got to bring to that
Yeah.
project. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think that's sort of the energy I try to bring to everything, whether it's something there's several projects that I'm working on that would have been past projects. And then there's also like new ideas that I have, right? And so it it feels really good now that I'm in a place where I've done a lot of this healing work already. I'll start a new song and I get this lovely combination of like I'm trusting the instinct to write this song. Like one of my more recent ones is called Okay. And I wrote
Mhm.
it off of a friend who who has a little baby. and was texting me after the election, and just
Mhm.
like about just the feeling of like, having like, what do you say to your little baby who doesn't understand what's happening, but things are hard, right? And so
Mm.
the first line of the song is, I know you saw me crying today. And
Mm.
so it's this way where I trust the first instinct of that song idea.
Mhm.
I flow with just the creativity of my inner artist child to like grab my ukulele, make more voice memos, write down random lyrics, like kind of do that, right? And
Yeah.
also all of the work I've done to like be in touch with my own feelings and my own grief process and my own experiences, as well as supporting other people through their grief processes, like lets
Mhm.
me integrate the emotional resonance of the song into the lyrics without like having to try to do it, right? It's like
Mm.
already there because
Mm.
it's all flows into the creative process.
Yeah. Mm. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one of
Um,
my favorite songs that I've written.
I wish you could play it for us.
Oh, well, I mean, maybe I'll send you something to add later.
Yeah, we can put it
It
we can
is
drop a
listen,
little.
it is on the ukulele album Leo and I are working on. So my husband has an audio engineering background, and we are working on an album of my ukulele songs. The
Amazing.
album is going to be called Little Piece of My Soul, which is one of the other songs. And talk about integrating.
Yeah.
And so it coming soon, coming soon.
I can't wait to hear it. Mm.
Um, yeah, I wonder if it would be good to share a couple other things I was thinking of that are kind of examples of really deep healing work I've done that have let me kind of have the freedom to do what I do now.
Yeah, I would love to hear, and I feel like you specifically mentioned stuff around shame, and I feel like
Yes.
as a trauma therapist, it's like 80%. I don't wanna say 80% exactly because I haven't done the math, but, like, I would wager it's like
Yep.
80% of trauma work is shame work.
Yes.
Um,
Absolutely.
and so I would love to, specifically hear more about that and also anything else you would like to share with us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think these other two pieces really do relate a lot to that.
Okay.
And I was looking back through week 3 of The Artist's Way,
Mm,
where she says that making a piece of art may feel a lot like telling a family secret, and that
mm,
shame is a controlling device that people use.
yeah,
And so I do think that shedding layers of shame has been like a really important part of like being a whole person myself that's more integrated, but also like being able to share that with other people.
mm,
Um,
yeah,
so the kind of two things I feel like are really key pieces to this are that I grew up in a hoarding situation
mm,
and that I grew up with a lot of shame and messaging around body image. And
mm,
my journey on those two things, which involve um, some very interesting, like control and lack of control kind of pieces,
yeah,
very much, yeah. And also a lot of like secret keeping that I think
yeah,
makes it really, really hard to put yourself out there as an artist
yeah,
when your whole life, and this goes back to like what you would see on the outside and what you would see on the inside of me growing up,
yeah,
your whole life is like two lives because you're hiding something all the time.
yeah,
And so I feel like what I was hiding, the two kind of pieces of one of each of my parents I was hiding. With my mom, it was her hoarding disorder. With my
mm,
dad, I would say it was his alcohol abuse. And so,
mm,
like, this combination, and if anyone has not read the Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents book, I'll give it a huge plug. Great book.
yeah,
Um, great, great book. And I think that, like, it is very challenging to grow up with parents who have pretty severe mental health disorders because, like,
mhm.
there's also more. Like, there's a whole we're not gonna dig through all the well, metaphor-wise, piles of things. We're not gonna dig through all of that today. But, but I think that, like, having these pieces of, we have severe mental health conditions, and then we also have emotional immaturity, means that the problem solving never happens. And that's why problem solving became my role.
Mm,
So to fast forward before I rewind, like I feel like I now have a way to, like, a big part of my job is problem solving in a sense, right? Brainstorming is problem solving.
yeah.
But I think that now I do it in a way that feels grounded, and in a
Mm,
way that's connected to myself, and in a
mhm,
way that's for, like, I feed my artist in order to then be able to support other people with their work, right?
mm,
So, like,
mhm.
I'm not doing the thing where I'm living unfulfilled dreams through other people that I work with, and that's, like, a huge value for me in my business.
Yeah.
So on the outside, you would have seen me, like, succeeding
Mm,
in classes, getting all A's growing up most of the time, being very involved in extracurriculars because that's something my mom, would be like, I never got to go to ballet, so I want you to do all the things. But then there's me, on my period in pain, outside of dance class, crying, like I don't want to go to dance class that day, and then being forced to go to dance class, right? So it's like this sort of massive overcorrection. But you would have seen, like, someone who, no one ever thought I needed help growing up,
mm,
right? Everyone kind of got the sense like everything was fine with me
yeah.
because I was always performing in that sense that everything
Mhm,
was fine with me, and
yeah.
kind of over exceeding in that way or excelling in that way. And so then on the inside, you would have seen a lot of instability. You would have seen um, a pretty terrible living situation a lot of
Mm,
the time. And
mm,
hoarding looks, I was thinking yesterday about how, like, I almost wish I'd had the kind of hoarding situation where you look like a doomsday prepper because everything's in rows. Like,
mm.
we weren't that organized. Like, this was chaos hoarding. And I
Oh.
think that's something when I went to couples therapy, um, before I got married, we found a couples therapist, and she's amazing, and she does thematic experiencing, which has been a really great part of my healing. She was the first therapist I worked with because I'd worked with an individual therapist before that, who
Mm,
actually understood. She had worked with children of hoarders, and
mm,
she was the first person from that thematic perspective to really help me understand how I related to my space,
mm,
because there's a combination of, like, dissociating from objects around you for
mhm,
protection,
mhm,
but also not having any kind of autonomy or agency over your own space. Partly
mhm,
because it's completely filled with things,
mm,
and partly because if you try to move something, even within the chaos, like, you get yelled at.
mm,
So you can't win, right?
mhm,
And this is where, like, again, you would see me showing up and making good grades, and you would see me being a drum major in high school, and you would see me doing dance and choir and musical theater and all the things.
yeah.
Meanwhile, we're living in hotels, we're living secretly at my dad's office, we're living in a car, like whatever the situation was at that time.
Mm,
And so I think, like, it has taken me so long to even be able to, like, talk about this without being super activated. Like, it's
mm,
actually lovely that I can, but I think just even the word hoarding used to just send my nervous system off the chart,
yeah.
because the mostly unspoken um, pressure to just act as if everything was normal while
Mm,
you're just, like, super dysregulated,
mhm,
it really felt like living two lives
yeah.
in parallel.
Yeah.
Um, and so much shame
Yeah.
associated with it. And then later, this fear and shame of, like, can I live with, like, can I be organized in my home?
Mm,
Like, can I have a clean home? Like, that, you kind of internalize that, or at least I did. And
yeah.
so I think for me, one of the resources, other than, like, lots of trauma therapy, so I don't have to say it here on this podcast, but therapy is awesome. Going to social work school myself so I could understand what trauma was, because my experience in an enmeshed family unit meant it had a lot of stories around, like, this is very artistry related as well, like, bad things happen to us. Not that we caused the bad things, but bad things happen to us, and I need to help save the family from the bad things. And so,
Mm,
like, I carried that so much. Like, I didn't see my parents as the ones causing these problems, which is
Mhm.
kind of incredible, like how that will work when you
Yeah.
have a combination of like emotional and psychological abuse and neglect
Mm.
and in a meshed family dynamic. It's like, oh, the world just is terrible and everything bad happens to us, right?
Yeah.
So I think like being able to have that zoomed out perspective by
Mhm.
doing trauma work and by learning in my social work master's program, like what even is trauma and like,
Mhm.
you know, my DSM class, I'm like, oh, like I feel like a lot of people go to social work school because they have some mental health stuff they want to work on. But like you go through that DSM and you're like, oh, that seems familiar. That seems familiar. Like you're kind of starting
Yeah.
to learn it. So anyway, um, I think that the disconnection there from my body, a big thing that other than trauma work helped me was actually doing Marie Kondo's
Mm.
Spark Joy process.
Yeah.
So the day that I went and bought the Artist Way book at Half Price Books, a used bookstore here, um, Leo bought Spark Joy. He read it and he goes, I really want to try this process. For context, Leo is half Japanese. Marie Kondo is Japanese, and there's a lot of really interesting things in the book that are really infused with the Japanese and specifically the like Shintoism and the perspective that I'll explain because it's part of what was so healing about it.
Mm.
Um, and I was like, because I remember when the TV show of hers first came out, it was very activated, like very triggering for me. I was like, they're like cleaning people's houses and getting rid of things. Like this
Yeah.
touches my a really deep trauma place.
Mm.
But I read the book because Leo had read it. And I was like, okay, all right, I'm going to read the book. That's a first step. And
Mhm.
reading it, I was like, oh, she's not a minimalist. She's not telling you to just like get rid of things and only have, they'll be like, only have 10 whatevers. She's like, well, in Shintoism, every object has a spirit.
Mm.
So this table has a spirit and my jacket has a spirit. And she's just like, we have a relationship to our items, but we don't think of it that right?
Mm.
We're disconnected from them. But what would it be like if you had a relationship to everything you own?
Mm.
And that was a really different way, like almost the opposite way, right, of thinking from how I grew up.
Yeah.
And I had been working on being more present in my space and all these things, but doing it takes like 6 months to a year to do her full process, she says, and I think that's pretty accurate. Doing that process where I held, and it was emotionally intense, right? But
Yeah.
I held every item I own
Yeah.
and I asked if it sparked joy.
Mhm.
And when I chose to keep it, I gave it a home. That's one of the steps is you give it a home in your house.
Mhm.
And I actually feel like I have a relationship to my things. Like sometimes I stand in my closet and I just like my clothes. Like they're so
Mhm.
pretty and I like the colors and I like the textures and
Mm.
it's a very different way of seeing in your space and also being embodied when you're
Mm.
in your space.
Yeah.
And for the artist way, like I have joy checked all of my art supplies, right? And like it also at the same time, Julia Cameron, because I did this in parallel with the first and second time of the artist way, which is super interesting experience. And I do want to write an article about that because I think they both are focused on you tapping into your intuition, and that's so
Yeah.
cool.
Mm.
Um, so Julia Cameron is like, spend money on your artist. And then
Mhm.
Marie Kondo is like, check if things bring you joy. So then I
Mm.
end up with like a bunch of art supplies that I actually really like. It's
Yeah.
like that's such a cool combination.
Yeah.
And so for me, like this piece of shedding shame to where I could like be embodied in my own space, right, with my own things, and also trust myself. Like so much about creativity is trust. And this
Yeah.
was also a process of like trusting that I can take care of a space and that I can take care of things. Like those healing pieces have been completely transformative for my life and for my mental health because
Mhm.
I'm more present and embodied. And that's also the place that I'm going to make art from is a present embodied space that brings me joy. Like everything in this room I'm in right now is like I either made it or I selected it and it
Yeah.
makes me very happy. And
Yeah.
that's super inspiring for making art,
Mm.
and a really good energy for me to bring to when I'm doing consulting with people.
Mm. Oh, I love I'm just like, I'm feeling so inspired by you, Anna, and
Mm.
I'm just like I feel like I'm becoming even more of a fangirl than I already was. Just
Well, thank you. Thank you. That's
mm,
very sweet. I
mm,
think, so interestingly, I will
mm.
say the Marie Kondo piece actually leads us perfectly into the body image piece
Yes.
because
Mhm.
imagine the first category she has you do is clothes.
Mhm.
Now, Marie Kondo does not have a lens of like body shame and fat phobia and all the things, right? That's not her point. But
Uh-huh.
imagine trying to joy check your clothes when you
Mm.
A, hate your body and have a lot of shame around it, and
Mm.
B, like have a particularly troubled relationship with your clothes. Like that would be almost impossible to
Mhm.
access a sense of joy. So
Mhm.
the other thing I would say is I could never have done the Marie Kondo process if I
Mm.
hadn't been on a journey of intuitive eating and body liberation.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
that I will say is the other, maybe like the third integrating piece to talk
Mhm.
about.
Yeah.
Um, because again, thinking about being like embodied and connected internally, I
Yeah.
remember in my individual therapy, the first time I was like, I think I need to work on my body image and I kind of scared and I don't know how to do that. And,
Yeah.
my therapist has somewhat of a somatic lens as well. And so she was like, okay, like check in with your body. And I was like, I think this is the first thing we've worked on where I have no connection internally. Like I
Mm.
couldn't give you a Likert scale of how activating it was. Like it was just nothing.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that was like that felt like a big deal. Like
Yeah.
everything else, I was like, oh yeah, like okay, if we talk about this, I feel activated. If we talk about that, I feel okay. And this
Mm.
was just like nothingness. And I
Mm.
kind of realized that because I had had this experience of, you know, feeling shame and control around my body and around food, that I had like really disconnected myself from the experience of my body. And
Hey, editing Ellen here. At this point in the conversation, Anna's power cut out and we had to take some steps to reconnect. And so there's a little bit of discontinuity in the conversation, and she'll reference the power being out when we come back.
looking behind me, like, oh, why is my lamp off? And then the power's out.
Yes.
Okay.
This looks different than I'm used to.
Yes, and I actually
Oh.
do know why. Okay. This
Mm,
is such a good example, actually, because in the past, something like the power going out
yeah.
would have just sent me into like a total tailspin
Mm,
because not having things like heat or water or AC or power would have been things that like would be a result of how bad the hoarding got.
mm,
But like now, not that it never activates me, like it can, especially if we lose heat when it's really cold or if we lose AC when it's really hot, for sure.
mm,
But
yeah.
like it is nice that the power can go out and it's not like a national emergency. So I do
Yeah.
love that for me.
I love that for you too.
Um, okay. Should I We're still recording? Good.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So we'll keep talking about the body image piece.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is one of my favorite things to talk about because I do think it created such a fundamental shift in my life.
Yeah.
And it is part of why I can do creativity in the way that I do it.
Yeah.
Um, so I was, as I was saying, I identified that I did not have a connection, right? And that one of the results of having had so much messaging and shame around body image
Mm,
was that I felt disconnected to mine.
Mhm.
And so what I did was and it's funny because the podcast I did with my friend Alejandra Spector, the Latinx Mental Health podcast, we interviewed Nethery Thurmond, who is an amazing, oh, you know Nethery?
I know
Yes.
Nethery a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, like an amazing therapist and like eating disorder specialist. And so
Mhm.
I was like learning from Ale and other people a little bit about like, okay, what's this intuitive eating thing?
Mhm.
Um, Food isn't always bad. Like, what's
Mhm.
that?
Wow.
I remember the first time I saw the idea of like body love on anywhere, I was like, I had this reaction of like, how could that, how could you, how could that be a thing? Like,
Mhm.
I don't understand how someone could love their body. Like, it's beyond comprehension. And I remember thinking, like, how do you get from hating, like from hate to love, like with your body? Like, I don't understand that. And so what I did was I worked with anti-diet dietitian. And so intuitive eating, for anyone who doesn't know, is a way of approaching eating that, as it sounds, comes from your intuition. But it rejects diet culture.
Mhm.
It helps you understand hunger and fullness, but also not as like not making it sneakily into a diet, but rather from the more intuitive place of actually being in touch with what you need.
Mhm.
And in order to really do it and to recover from like eating disorders or disordered eating,
Mhm.
understanding fat phobia, internalized fat phobia, and dismantling that is like super key.
Mhm.
And so I was on this journey. I think I started working with a dietitian when I was in 2019.
Mhm.
And I worked with 3 now. Um, my current one is like she's so amazing. She's my favorite. Um, and she's got just like the best lens of like even bringing in things like parts work to it and things like
Mhm.
that, which is so cool. But I've just been on a journey of dismantling fat phobia, understanding its roots in racism, first of all,
Mhm. Mhm.
because essentially anti-fat bias is rooted in anti-blackness.
Yeah.
Also, being able to understand the pendulum that we talk about with intuitive eating, where when you've been restricting,
Mhm.
oftentimes that's why we have a restrict binge cycle is like you've restricted food so much and then okay over here you're needing to compensate because we hungry, your body's
Yeah.
hungry. Like it's
Yeah.
normal to be hungry, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But what that means is you need an abundance, right? Like you need an abundance of options. And of course, like that can be challenging in food deserts and things like that. So I think it's like the systemic pieces are important to acknowledge and look at. But I remember a specific example because I would listen to Christy Harrison's podcast, Food Psych. And
Mhm.
the example everybody would give was like, I used to not be able to have ice cream in my freezer without eating it all.
Mhm.
And then now I can have ice cream go bad in the freezer where it gets all crusted over. And I was like, never, never could I do that. That would never happen. And now I like am one of the people that regularly has like frostbitten ice cream in my freezer. I was like, oh my God, they were right. Um,
Mm.
so um the food piece and the body piece, I think this
Mhm.
is why I've created the take up space project for my business
Yeah.
is how are you going to take up space with your art, with
Mm.
your ideas, with your work
Mhm.
if you are constantly trying to not take up space with your body, constantly being told that your body takes up too much space, that your voice takes up too much space, that your desires take up too much space, that your pleasure takes up too much space.
Yeah.
These are incongruent.
Yeah.
And also, how am I going to make art or authentically create a business if there's this huge part of me that is like the thing I move around in the world with that I am fundamentally disconnected from?
Mm. Yeah.
And so I'm
Mm.
really interested in continuing to explore that
Mm.
um, for myself and for others, right? Through this project, the Take Up Space project.
Yeah.
and also could never have done the So Healing Marie Kondo process
Mhm.
if I hadn't already been at a place where all my clothes fucking fit me. I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on this podcast.
Yes.
Okay. Well, they did. So I wasn't joy
Yeah.
checking like, "Oh, but these are goal pants," or something,
Yeah.
right? Like, that was no more. It was
Yeah.
truly like, "Does this piece of clothing bring me joy?"
Mhm.
And I always say, like, it is a privilege to fully do the Marie Kondo process because I recommend that people have some amount of money you can spend on new things if you do it because, like, very difficult to do something like realize you none of your underwear brings you joy.
Mm.
It's like, you gotta buy new underwear then. So we
Ooh,
need a little like, you can't just get rid of it and then do without it. So you're
yeah.
gonna need, like, there's a piece of that where, like, ideally you enter into it with, like, the ability to buy a couple new things, right? If you
Yeah.
realize things don't bring you joy. Um,
Mm,
but I think that the part about it that's, like, tuning into your intuition, that
mhm,
spark she talks about is
mhm,
so similar to me to the artist
mhm.
way, tuning into your intuition and your inner knowing.
Yeah.
And so again, like, that idea of integrating, in this case, who I am
Mhm,
in, I guess, a more embodied sense where I actually have I can actually say I love my body now, which is so cool,
mhm.
but that's also not necessarily the point, and it's okay if people live in a space of body neutrality, their whole lives, and, like, whereas I am in a fat body, like, I also, like, experience privilege within that because
Mm,
I just rode on an airplane recently, and I can still fit in the seat without a
mhm.
seatbelt extender, and, like, I do move through the world with that amount of privilege that others don't, and so I think, like, it's a both and
Yeah.
in that sense, um, but it was still a journey to be able to, you can get very angry at, like, the systemic piece of, like, what clothes are available for you and all the things,
Yeah.
and you can also understand, like, what you do have access to, and you
Mm,
can also have a process from within that is,
mm,
like, knowing that we all deserve, like, love and care and
mm.
pleasure and creativity and all the things,
Yeah.
um, regardless. And so I think that integrating piece and also shedding of shame piece, I mean, it'll, I'm sure, still continue to be a journey for me, but
Mhm,
that's how I can show up and make things and
mm.
support other people. And I think bringing all of these lenses to it, I think the word holistic has kind of been taken over by wellness culture. But I was talking with someone recently about how I feel like my approach to consulting, especially one on one,
Mhm,
is very holistic. Like, it is not just like, "What's your idea and let's brainstorm it." Like,
mhm.
most of the time, as you know, like, the first step is usually slowing down, which
Yeah.
people aren't expecting. Um, but
Mm,
then I feel like a big part of it is talking about your whole life. Like, I have consulted with people on what their space looks like, whether
mhm.
it's because of neurodiversity and, like, what do you need available to you so that you can do your creative work and you can do your other work that you're working on,
Yeah.
or, like, what does your nanny schedule need to be so that you have time to, like, work on these other pieces that you want to do, and
Yeah.
that's all part of it. Because
Mhm,
I think, coming from my experience, like, I don't wanna leave out some piece that's so important to your life, or to have you feel like you can't talk about it or have shame around it,
mhm.
when that needs to be a part of the conversation as you as a whole person to make your dreams come true.
Mm. Yeah. 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 I love that. I agree. I feel like it's, um, weird to talk about things being holistic, right? Because of
Right.
there's, like, this kind of connotation that can kinda go along with it. But I think that I feel like in the work that we have done together, like, some both a little one-on-one and then as groups, like,
Yeah.
I feel that and how, like, the it feels like nothing is off the table, like,
Mm. I'm glad.
Yeah, like whatever kind of need, even though our group is kind of focused around creativity and our creative work and nourishing our creative selves,
Mhm.
um, it's like you acknowledge that everything we do feeds into that, right? And so,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, and I think that's maybe that's sort of part of maybe that's part of the message of healing stories too, right? That like we think about and I think like with Western medicine, everything is sort of very
Mhm.
siloed, right? And it's like you go to the mental health doctor for your mental health,
Right.
and you go to the knee doctor for your knee pain, and you go to a different doctor for something else. And it's like,
Mhm.
okay, but like you get to be a whole person.
Yes, I was just thinking that. I was just thinking
Yeah,
how, like, Western that is, and, like,
yeah,
how what a disservice that does, and,
yeah,
sometimes, like, sure, sometimes you're gonna take a writing class and it's, like, just about writing, and,
yeah,
I'm not saying there's something wrong with that,
yeah,
but I do think if we wanna make, like, fundamental transformative changes in our lives toward being our most fulfilled selves,
yeah,
that we can't do that by looking at just one little slice.
yeah.
And that was actually the goal when I left my previous job and took a 6-month sabbatical. So someone whose work I haven't mentioned that's also very core to my healing, who I recently saw live, which was like a dream come true, is Trisha Hersey and the Nat Ministry. Again, rooted in an understanding of a history of racism and anti-Blackness and
Yeah.
grind culture and capitalism and how all of these things intersect and work together to keep us exhausted
Yeah.
and, unable to have a more communal sense of each other and working toward, healing for everyone. And so particularly during the pandemic I did a lot of work with immigration attorneys and immigration work in general was a lot of what my social work looked like. And I was bringing this idea of rest as resistance to them because I always talk about the sneaky way grind culture shows up in nonprofits who are often very justice oriented and maybe don't realize that the capitalism piece has seeped in the way they still grind because they're grinding for a cause, not just like they can identify it in like a tech company, like you're grinding for money. But we're like, we're all still grinding. It's just like we have a moral layer over it. So actually, we feel even guiltier when we're not grinding. So it's
Mm,
like, ugh, that's intense. So
yeah.
kind of bringing that, I think, is an entry point to talking about rest and taking care of yourself in a communal sense, um, that people who are interested in social justice can latch onto a little bit more easily than just like, hearing the word rest and just having an immediate wall come up.
Yeah.
Um, so that piece was something that I was really especially growing up as you might imagine with some of the pieces I've shared, like high levels of toxic stress
Mhm.
and survival mode. I
Yeah.
didn't go deeply into scarcity, but maybe we can do a little bit on scarcity abundance because I think that between the food pieces and the housing pieces and all of that, like such
Yeah.
an intense feeling of scarcity, and the
Yeah.
artist way really kind of brings in an abundance perspective that I think, and intuitive eating brings an abundance perspective that is so healing.
Yeah.
So we could potentially circle back to that. But one of the things that I did want to, have an abundance of was rest. And when I left my last position,
Mm,
I did it with a plan. We
mhm,
made a budget and made a plan for
mm,
a 6-month sabbatical. And I had
mm,
never, since I was, an adult, I had never not worked. And most of the time I was working 2 to 4 jobs. Like there was only one time right at the end of the pandemic where I worked one job.
wow,
And so it was scary and exciting. I had done the artist way twice by that point
mm,
and done a lot of work around the Knot Ministry stuff.
yeah,
And I gave myself the first 3 months with no goals
yeah,
and no planning and no structure. And I call this my second childhood or my first childhood. And
Mm,
I like built Legos and I like watched cartoon movies and I rested and I did make art, but not with like specific goals in mind.
mm,
And I didn't do the artist way again until the second 3 months of that time. And so
mm.
that was so healing for
Yeah.
me to have permission to just be.
Mhm,
And also, I was burnt out from the work I was doing at that point. So that was very healing. But it felt like living the artist way and living, the Nat Ministries, teachings and just gifting myself that time that I hadn't had to
mm,
just be. And I think fundamentally, all the things I'm talking about are about knowing that you're enough as you are, and you don't have to do anything or be anything to have
mm,
value.
mhm,
And having 3 months where I didn't actually have to do or be anything was such an embodied way of experiencing that
mhm,
enoughness. Um, and I try to call back to that in moments of stress where I'll just be like, because it can seep into creativity too. Like,
mhm,
okay, I've kind of undone my productivity around jobs, but now it's like, oh, but like unless I finish this art project, maybe I'm still not enough. And then it's like, no, no, no. Like, you
yeah.
are enough as you are. Now, what
Mm,
would be the most fun or the most you way to proceed with this art project? Like, that's
mm,
really important for
yeah.
me to do.
Mm,
Um, and so I think that that other piece of the Nat ministry and of resting, when I came at the end of my sabbatical and I was like, what am I going to do next?
mhm,
My two guiding posts were first, I want my whole self to be in it
mm,
because, and this is where we kind of reach our like integration, like really intentional integration, right? Like I, in my previous work, had been focused on immigration and social work, and I didn't feel like there was room there for me to also write songs and be an artist and dabble. And, like
yeah.
it was like a slice of me again. So I was like, I want my whole self to be here. And also I asked myself, what is the most intuitive way for me to make money?
Mm, yeah.
Because any other question I tried was like taking me down spiral roads of stressing. But
Mm,
once I had the thought of like, what's the most intuitive way for me to make money? I was like, okay, like that feels like it aligns with this whole journey I've been on in this whole process. And it will get me an answer that is sustainable. And
mm,
so creating Vidina Visions Consulting, like that's how I started it was, all right, well, the most intuitive thing I do in my regular life that people I've done mostly for free for all the people in my life is brainstorming.
yeah.
Like I love ideas.
Yeah.
I love brainstorming. Like
Yeah.
when someone says, I have an idea, I'm just like, I'm so excited. What is
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
And so, bringing that enthusiasm and excitement about ideas, and whether that's someone's creative project or they want to start a business or a private practice or an organization is doing strategic planning, because I happen to love strategic planning, which nobody else does, or even like, I offer organization consulting that like is some of the other pieces I've done, like grant writing. And last year I opened up immigration consulting and I just went to Boston to provide workshops for an organization. And it's
Mhm.
really interesting now to then integrate that piece and be like, I'm doing what I was doing, but I'm doing it with my whole self. I'm doing it as me now. The beginning of the workbook I bring has a poem I wrote about doing this work,
Mm,
right? And
mhm.
the whole workbook itself is a coloring book that you color while I give the presentation. And
Mm,
I put together all the designs and I pick my branding and I change it when I need to because we are not stagnant beings. Like we are
yeah.
constantly changing and evolving. And
Yeah.
my website for my business has my artist portfolio on it. You can listen to my music. You can look at my paintings, right? Like
Mm,
like my it is truly me. And I
yeah.
have not pieced myself apart anymore or
Yeah.
hidden parts of me away.
Yeah.
And the like freedom and autonomy of that really speaks to me, but also the feeling of like ease
Mhm.
of not feeling disjointed anymore. It brings me a lot of peace.
Yeah. 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 That makes so much sense. And I think that's always that's often the goal, right? Like folks don't go to therapy or they don't start a healing journey thinking like, I want things to be the same, right? It's like I want
Of course.
yeah, it's like I want to feel different. I want to feel more
Mm,
connected to myself. I want to feel more complete or whole or integrated, right?
yeah.
Um, and yeah, I love hearing about your journey and how like your individual healing journey gets to like spiral out in all of these directions with your work and helping others on their healing journeys is so good.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
it feels, and like I said, I think like it feels central to it, kind of like how therapists like also need to be in therapy a lot of the time. Like I think, for me, I I feel like I need to be creating and feeding my own ideas, and that is how I actually have enthusiasm for others, is
Yeah.
also because, I think I put on my website, like, I believe in you because I believe in me.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
it's all connected. And I do, like, I really like, you came to me like, I don't know, a year ago, we are talking about this podcast,
Mhm.
and now I'm like on the podcast. And like one of my favorite things is
Yeah.
like seeing things come to life, right?
Yeah.
And like that the piece around scarcity relates to time too, that like, you know, both in the artist way she says like, okay, do you know how long it'll take me to learn the piano? She's like, the same amount of time if you don't. So
Mm.
both like don't wait to start, but
Yeah.
also there's no rush. And I
Yeah.
think that like some of the best things come with time and take time, and that it's okay to take the process so that when you do launch a thing or whatever, it's sustainable, because
Mhm.
I don't think that's something we're taught how to do.
Yeah.
And at the same time, like, don't wait to start in some way,
Yeah.
right? Because like whatever whoever's listening right now, whatever idea you have, it's a good idea. And you should believe in it, and I believe in it, and like take one step toward it. The biggest lesson from the artist way that I took with me is do one thing for your artist every day.
Mm.
And that can look like drinking tea out of your favorite mug, or making a little painting,
Yeah.
or working on a bigger project. Like it can look like anything. But
Yeah.
I think that that has been transformative for me, of like nourishing in
Yeah.
all these different ways myself and my creativity.
Mm. Love.
Yeah.
Yeah. That also it feels like this feels like a really great like I just feel like we need like a little button, like a little the little like at the how the songs in the musicals have like the
Yes,
bum,
a little
bum.
button. Well,
Yeah.
maybe my power can just go out again, and then that'll that'll be the bit of the episode. Mm.
In the show notes, you will be able to find Anna's website. Is there anything else that you would like to tell folks about or
Mm.
other places folks you would like to connect or folks can find you? Um, or just anything else
Yeah.
about your work that you would like to share?
Yeah. I think the
Yeah.
only project I didn't talk about is called Break the Box. So I'll
Mm,
just share that because it's kind of a fun thing where I trusted one of my ideas.
yeah,
Um, Basically, the concept is that an organization brings me in to facilitate a creative art activity.
yeah,
And for the regular Break the Box experience, they'll pick like a specific thing to focus on. So, like, one that I did was a group of like 75 teachers who were at a school with a lot of international students that spoke different languages. And so we brought in the idea of language justice and together created this big language justice tree art piece. And so it stays as an installation in your space afterwards at your organization. And then I also have launched Break the Box Minis, which is more of a shorter experience because I think there's kind of a desire sometimes for like, can we do something, but it's a little smaller and each of us takes it home with us. And
Mhm.
so um it's a fun combination of creativity and facilitation for me.
Yeah.
The other one was like, oh, people who all work at a private practice, but they don't ever really like see each other because they're all there at different times, and they
Yeah.
just wanted to like do some bonding, and so we did that. So um,
Mm.
I'm never afraid to try an idea, launch it, and see how it lands with people, and keep building my skill set. So that might be the one piece I didn't talk about of what I do with folks.
Yeah.
And then I have 2 Instagrams. I have one for my business at Vidina Visions Consulting, and then
Mhm.
one for my art at Vidina Visions. And that's the only
Mhm.
place I have things a little separated. But honestly, it's because I like absolutely want to be a full-time artist and I want my art to make me money and I want to claim that. And so I like it's more like I gave my inner artist child a sandbox and I was like,
Mm.
here, there's no limits. Like this is
Mhm.
where, you can play and we don't have to worry about like branding or like what, I'm sharing about my work with my business or something. So those are 2 places that you can find me. But as I mentioned, my website has all the things
Mm.
and it will continue to. So it's a good place also that, you can fill out a form and reach out and stuff like that. So all that's on there.
Mm. Yay. Anna, thank you so much for being here and for
Thanks for
sharing.
having me.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for sharing your stories with us and showing us all of the different ways that healing has looked like for you and some of the folks that you've worked with. I really appreciate
Yeah.
you.
Thank you. I appreciate you too.
Mm, hearts.
Yeah, we're making hearts just for reference.
For the people at home.
For the people at home, and we're doing them like millennials, not like Gen Zers.
Oh, yes. This is the millennial way to make the little
It
hearts.
is. It is. Whole hands.
Okay. I'm going to stop recording now.
Okay.
How do I do that? Hey, it's Editing Ellen again. Remember at the very beginning of the conversation when Anna said that she had written a song for her friend and it was going to be on her ukulele album? Well, she has shared a demo of that song with us. And so that is what you're going to hear play after the outro today. Hope you love it. Hello, this is Outro Ellen. Thanks so much for listening today. If you're interested in hearing more healing stories, please subscribe on the platform where you're listening or join my newsletter, Find Your Fierce, on Substack. If you subscribe on Substack, you'll get an email every time I publish an episode, so you'll never miss one. The link to Substack is in the episode description. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can head over to Find Your Fierce and join as a monthly, annual, or founding subscriber. Paid subscribers make it possible for these stories to be shared far and wide, and you'll get access to bonus letters, episodes, and events that are just for subscribers. If you want to go above and beyond, please leave us a rating or a review on the platform where you're listening, or share this episode with a friend, frenemy, lover, family member, boss, colleague, or someone who needs it. I'm sending you the love and peace you need to be your best self today and every day. Audio hugs. Bye.
I know you saw me crying today. I didn't have the words, didn't know what to say, but the way you held me, gentle in your gaze, it felt okay. It felt okay. I know that sometimes I don't know what to do, and I don't want to hide the truth from you. So then, if you'll grant me a little bit of grace, we'll find our place. We'll find our place. I know I stumble in the dark of night. I didn't have the words, didn't know what to say, but the way you held me, gentle in your gaze,